Princess Ilara stood at the grand window of her tower, watching the morning mist roll across the castle gardens. Her fingers traced the cold glass as she searched for any sign of him among the rose bushes below. 3 months had passed since Prince Adrian of the neighboring kingdom had first walked through those very gardens, and her heart still raced at the memory of their first meeting. She had been practicing her archery that day, determined to prove to her father that she could be more than just a pretty face at royal gatherings. The arrow had flown wide, sailing past the target and nearly striking a tall stranger who had been admiring the fountain. Instead of anger, he had laughed. A warm, genuine sound that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment, and something else she couldn't quite name. "I do hope your aim is better with words than with arrows, Your Highness," he had said, bowing deeply but with mischief dancing in his green eyes. That moment had changed everything. What began as formal diplomatic visits between their kingdoms had slowly transformed into stolen conversations in hidden corners of the castle, secret walks through moonlit gardens, and letters passed between trusted servants. Adrian wasn't like the other princes who had come seeking her hand. He listened when she spoke about books and music, asked her opinions about matters of state, and never once suggested that her thoughts were too complex for a princess to hold. Now, as autumn painted the leaves in shades of gold and crimson, Ilara felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her shoulders. Her father, King Aldrich, had made his decision clear during their tense conversation the night before. The kingdom of Valthera needed allies, not romantic entanglements. Prince Marcus of the Eastern Realm had offered a substantial dowry and military support that their small kingdom desperately needed to defend against growing threats from the northern barbarian tribes. "You have a duty to your people, Ilara," her father had said, his voice heavy with the burden of kingship. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford when our very survival is at stake." But how could she explain to him that her love for Adrian wasn't just about her own heart? In their long conversations, they had dreamed together of uniting their kingdoms, not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through genuine partnership. Adrian had shown her maps and trade routes, speaking passionately about how their combined resources could create prosperity for both their peoples. He saw her not just as a beautiful princess, but as a future queen with ideas worth implementing. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her chambers made Ilara's pulse quicken. She recognized that particular rhythm. Quick, light steps that belonged to her lady-in-waiting, Mira, who had become her closest confidant and the keeper of all her secrets. "My lady," Mira whispered urgently as she slipped through the door. "Prince Adrian has arrived. He's requesting an audience with the king, but—" She paused, her face troubled. "The guards say your father has given orders that the prince is to be received only in the formal throne room, with the full council present. No private meetings." Ilara's heart sank. A formal audience meant witnesses, protocol, and no chance for the honest conversation they desperately needed. It meant her father intended to deliver his rejection of any alliance between their kingdoms in the most public and humiliating way possible. "When?" she asked, already moving toward her wardrobe. "Within the hour." "But my lady, your father has also commanded that you remain in your chambers until Prince Marcus arrives this afternoon for the betrothal ceremony." The words hit Ilara like physical blows. Betrothal ceremony. This afternoon. Her father hadn't just made his decision. He had acted on it, without even giving her a chance to say goodbye to Adrian properly. The man she loved would learn of her engagement to another while she was locked away like a prisoner in her own home. For a moment, the princess felt the familiar surge of helpless anger that had plagued her since childhood. Born into royalty meant born into a cage, even if it was a beautiful one, decorated with silk and jewels. But then she thought of Adrian's words during one of their late-night conversations in the garden. "True nobility isn't about the crown you wear, Ilara. It's about the choices you make when everything you value is at stake." "Mira," she said quietly, her voice growing steady with determination. "How well do you know the servants' passages that run behind the throne room?" Her lady-in-waiting's eyes widened with understanding and worry. "My lady, If you're caught, if I'm caught, I'll face the consequences. But I won't let Adrian believe. I chose this willingly, and I won't enter into a marriage built on the foundation of a lie. Elara pulled a simple brown cloak from the back of her wardrobe, one she had used before for her secret adventures beyond the castle walls. Help me, Mira, please. The older woman studied her mistress's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The passage behind the tapestry of King Aldrich's grandfather leads directly to a small alcove behind the throne. You'll be able to hear everything, but if anyone discovers you, they won't, Elara said with more confidence than she felt. And if they do, I'll tell them the truth, that a princess has the right to know what's being said about her future. As she wrapped the cloak around her shoulders and pulled the hood low over her distinctive golden hair, Elara felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. For once in her life, she was choosing her own path, even if it led toward heartbreak. In less than an hour, she would listen as the man she loved learned that she was lost to him forever. But at least she would be there, in the only way she could manage, to witness the moment when their impossible dream finally shattered. The hidden passage was narrow and dusty, clearly unused by anyone except the occasional servant tasked with cleaning the tapestries. Elara moved carefully, her soft slippers making no sound on the stone floor. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices as the royal council assembled in the throne room. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she reached the small alcove Mira had described, pressing her eye to a tiny gap in the carved wooden panel that allowed her to see into the chamber beyond. Her father sat on the golden throne, wearing his full ceremonial robes and the heavy crown that she knew gave him headaches after long formal proceedings. The council members stood in their designated positions, their faces grave and formal. And there, standing alone in the center of the room with his back straight and his hands clasped behind him, was Adrian. Even from her hidden position, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set with determination. He wore his finest diplomatic attire, a deep blue tunic embroidered with the silver stars of his family's crest, and the ceremonial sword that marked him as heir to his father's throne. But more than his appearance, it was the way he held himself that made Elara's throat tighten with emotion. He stood like a man preparing for battle, ready to fight for something precious. Prince Adrian of Astoria. King Aldrich's voice rang out formally. You have requested this audience to discuss matters of mutual interest between our kingdoms. Speak. Speak. End quote. Adrian stepped forward and bowed deeply, but when he straightened, his green eyes looked directly at the king without wavering. Your Majesty, I come before you not just as the heir to Astoria's throne, but as a man deeply committed to the future prosperity and security of both our realms. Over these past months, I have had the privilege of learning about Valthara's rich culture, your people's resilience, and your kingdom's strategic importance in our region. Elara held her breath. Even in this formal setting, Adrian's natural charisma and intelligence shone through. She could see some of the council members leaning forward slightly, interested despite themselves in what this young prince had to say. I have come to formally request the hand of Princess Elara in marriage, Adrian continued, his voice growing stronger. But more than that, I come to propose an alliance that would benefit both our peoples for generations to come. The king's expression remained impassive, but Elara caught the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was struggling to control his temper. Prince Adrian, your feelings toward my daughter are noted. However, Valthara's needs extend beyond romantic considerations. With respect, Your Majesty, I believe our union would address precisely those needs. Adrian reached into his tunic and withdrew a leather portfolio. I have brought detailed proposals for trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and collaborative efforts that would strengthen both our kingdoms against external threats. As he began to outline his plans, Elara felt her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously. This was the Adrian she had fallen in love with. Not just the charming prince, but the thoughtful leader who genuinely cared about creating a better future. He spoke of establishing new trade routes that would bring prosperity to both kingdoms. of combining their military forces to create a defensive alliance that could protect against northern raiders, and of sharing knowledge and resources in ways that would benefit every citizen. But she could see from her father's rigid posture that none of it mattered. The king had already made his choice, and no amount of logical argument would sway him from the path he believed would best serve his kingdom's immediate needs. When Adrian finished speaking, the throne room fell silent except for the soft crackling of torches along the walls. King Aldrich studied the young prince for what felt like an eternity before speaking. "Your proposals are comprehensive, Prince Adrian. However, they rely on future possibilities rather than present certainties." The king's voice was measured, but firm. "Valthara cannot afford to gamble with potential when we have concrete offers of immediate support." Ilara watched Adrian's face as understanding dawned. His carefully controlled expression didn't change. But she saw the slight slumping of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched briefly before relaxing again. "I see," Adrian said quietly. "May I ask if Princess Ilara is aware of your decision?" "My daughter understands her duty to her kingdom," King Aldrich replied, and the words felt like daggers in Ilara's chest. "She will wed Prince Marcus of Eastmere in a ceremony to be held this very afternoon. The alliance has already been formalized." The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. Through the gap in the panel, she watched Adrian close his eyes briefly, his composure finally cracking just enough to reveal the depth of his pain. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears. But his voice remained steady. "Then, I wish Princess Ilara every happiness in her marriage, and I pray that her union will bring the security and prosperity that Valthara seeks." It was then that Adrian did something that would stay with Ilara forever. Instead of turning to leave, he looked around the throne room as if memorizing every detail, and then spoke again. His words clearly meant, for ears other than those present, "Your Majesty, if I may be permitted one final observation, I have found Princess Ilara to possess not only great beauty and grace, but wisdom, compassion, and strength that would make any kingdom fortunate to have her as their queen. Whatever challenges lie ahead for Valthara, you may face them with confidence, knowing that your daughter carries within her all the noble qualities necessary to lead with both heart and mind." As Adrian bowed once more and turned to leave, Ilara felt tears streaming down her face. His words were a message meant for her, a final declaration of his love and respect that he knew somehow she would hear. In that moment, she understood that while their romance was ending, the connection they had forged was deeper than political convenience could destroy. The sound of his footsteps echoing through the corridor grew fainter until silence returned to the throne room. Ilara remained hidden in the alcove, her heart shattered but strangely grateful. She had witnessed the end of her first love, but she had also seen the measure of the man she was losing. Adrian had faced rejection with dignity, had spoken of her with honor even in his moment of defeat, and had shown her father and the council exactly what kind of leader he would become. As the council began to disperse and her father rose wearily from his throne, Ilara knew that the afternoon would bring her betrothal to Prince Marcus and the beginning of a new chapter in her life. But she also knew that she would carry Adrian's final words with her always, a reminder that true love honors the beloved even when it cannot possess them. The first part of their story was ending, but Ilara sensed that destiny was far from finished with either of them. 3 years had passed since the day Ilara watched Adrian's heart break in the throne room, and she had learned to carry her own shattered pieces with the grace expected of a queen. Queen Ilara of Eastmere now stood in her private solar, reviewing reports from across her adopted kingdom, while her young son played quietly with wooden toys at her feet. Prince Gabriel, barely 2 years old, had his father's dark hair but his mother's thoughtful blue eyes. He was the one bright joy that had emerged from her marriage to Prince Marcus, though the union itself had proven to be everything she had feared and nothing she had hoped for. Marcus was not cruel. She had to give him that much credit. He was simply absent. Even when he was physically present in the same room, his mind was always elsewhere, on hunting, on drinking with his companions, on the various young ladies of the court who caught his wandering eye. He had married her for political alliance, and had gotten exactly what he wanted from the arrangement. The fact that she was desperately unhappy seemed to escape his notice entirely. "Your Majesty," her new lady-in-waiting, Lady Catherine, announced from the doorway. "A messenger has arrived from your father's court. He bears urgent news." Ilara's stomach tightened with worry. Communications between Valthera and Eastmere had been formal and infrequent since her marriage, limited mainly to ceremonial exchanges and trade discussions. Urgent news could only mean trouble. "Send him in," she instructed, lifting Gabriel into her arms. The little boy immediately snuggled against her shoulder, and she drew comfort from his warm weight. The messenger who entered was young but travel-worn, his clothes dusty from hard riding. He bowed deeply before speaking. "Your Majesty, I bring word from King Aldrich of Valthara. The northern raiders have broken through the mountain passes in greater numbers than ever before. 3 border villages have been attacked and burned. The king requests immediate military assistance under the terms of your marriage alliance." The words hit Ilara like a physical blow. She had always known this day might come. It was the very reason her father had insisted on her marriage to Marcus. But somehow, in the quiet years that had followed, she had allowed herself to hope that diplomacy and careful border management might prevent outright war. "Has King Marcus been informed?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The messenger shifted uncomfortably. "His Majesty is currently away on a hunting expedition." "Your Majesty. The council felt it best to inform you immediately, given your connection to the situation." Away on a hunting expedition. Ilara almost laughed at the bitter irony. Her homeland was burning, and her husband was chasing deer through the forest with his drinking companions. She forced her expression to remain calm and regal, unwilling to show weakness before a messenger who would report back to her father's court. "Thank you for bringing this news so swiftly," she said formally. "Please inform my father that Eastmere will honor its obligations. I will see that the matter is given immediate attention." After the messenger was escorted away to refresh himself, Ilara sank into her chair, Gabriel still in her arms. She thought of her childhood home, of the castle where she had learned to ride and read and dream of the future. She pictured the villages she had visited with her father during royal progresses. Small communities where everyone knew everyone else, where children played in streets that were now probably stained with blood. "My lady," Catherine said gently, "shall I send word to the captain of the guard to locate His Majesty?" Ilara looked down at her son, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his small fingers curled trustingly around a fold of her dress. In 3 years of marriage, Marcus had shown little interest in the responsibilities of kingship, content to let his advisors handle most matters of state while he pursued his pleasures. The idea of waiting for him to return from his hunting trip while her people suffered was unbearable. "No," she said quietly, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Send word to Lord Commander William. Tell him I wish to convene an emergency council meeting within the hour. And, Catherine, have someone prepare a fast horse and traveling clothes." Her lady-in-waiting's eyes widened with alarm. "My lady, surely you don't mean to travel to Valthera yourself? The roads are dangerous, and with the raiders, the roads may be dangerous. But staying here and doing nothing while my people die is unacceptable." Ilara stood, cradling Gabriel carefully. "Besides, someone needs to assess the situation firsthand before committing troops. Lord Commander William is competent, but he's never fought northern raiders. I grew up hearing stories of their tactics from the veterans of my grandfather's wars. What she didn't say, but what she couldn't stop thinking about, was that somewhere in the web of alliances and diplomatic relationships that governed their region, Adrian and the Kingdom of Astoria were involved. The northern raiders threatened all the smaller kingdoms along the mountain border. Not just Valthera. If her homeland was under attack, then Adrian's people were in danger too. The emergency council meeting was tense and chaotic. Lord Commander William was a solid, practical man who understood his duty. But even he seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the request. Eastmere's army was substantial, but mobilizing it for a campaign in foreign territory would take weeks of preparation. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "while we can certainly provide military assistance to Valthara, the logistics of moving our forces across two kingdoms will be complex. Perhaps it would be better to wait for His Majesty's return before making such significant commitments." "Lord Commander," Elara said firmly, "every day we wait is another day that innocent people die. My father would not have sent for help unless the situation was truly desperate. We cannot afford to delay action for the sake of protocol." She looked around the council table at the assembled advisors, men who had served Marcus's family for years and who clearly struggled with taking orders from a queen in her husband's absence. But she was not just Marcus's wife. She was also the daughter of an allied king. And her word carried weight in its own right. "I propose to travel to Valthara immediately with a small advance guard," she continued. "Lord Commander William will follow within the week with the main force. This will allow me to assess the situation firsthand and coordinate our response with my father's military advisors." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concerns. Finally, Lord Regent Edmund, Marcus's elderly uncle who served as chief advisor, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, while your dedication to your homeland is admirable, surely such a dangerous journey is unsuitable for a queen and mother. Perhaps a diplomatic envoy would be more appropriate." Elara had been expecting this objection, and she was ready for it. "Lord Edmund, I am not just any diplomat. I am King Aldrich's daughter, and I understand Valthara's defenses, terrain, and resources better than anyone else in this room. More importantly, my presence will demonstrate Eastmere's genuine commitment to the Alliance in a way that no envoy possibly could." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final argument. "And as for my role as a mother, what kind of mother would I be if I allowed my son to inherit a world where allied kingdoms abandon each other in times of crisis? Gabriel's future depends on the strength of the alliances we maintain today." The logic was sound, and they all knew it. One by one, the council members nodded their agreement. Lord Commander William began discussing practical arrangements for the journey, while Lord Edmund drafted messages to be sent to King Marcus whenever he could be located. As the meeting concluded and the advisors dispersed to handle their various tasks, Elara felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination settling in her chest. She was about to undertake the most dangerous journey of her life, leaving behind the safety of her adopted home to ride toward a war zone. But she was also, for the first time in 3 years, taking action that felt meaningful and right. That night, as she tucked Gabriel into his crib, she whispered promises to him that she hoped she would be able to keep. She would return safely. She would help save her homeland, and somehow, she would find a way to build a future where he could grow up in a world shaped by courage rather than fear. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect for hard travel. Elara dressed in practical riding clothes, leather boots, wool trousers, and a warm cloak that would serve her better than silk gowns on the road ahead. As she prepared to mount her horse, Catherine approached with a small wrapped package. "A gift from the cook," the lady-in-waiting explained. "She said every traveler needs something sweet to remember home by." Elara smiled, touched by the simple kindness. As she unwrapped the package, she found a collection of honey cakes, the same treats that the castle cook in Valthara had made for her as a child. The familiar smell brought tears to her eyes and steel to her spine. "Tell everyone I will return," she told Catherine, "and tell my son, when he's old enough to understand, that his mother rode out to fight for what was right." The small company that accompanied her, 6 guards, a guide who knew the mountain roads, and a young squire to handle the horses, was chosen for speed and stealth rather than impressive display. They would take routes that avoided the main roads where possible, traveling through forests and valleys that offered more cover but required local knowledge to navigate safely. As they rode through the gates of Eastmere Castle and turned toward the mountains that separated her from her homeland, Elara felt the weight of her crown and her choices pressing down on her shoulders. Behind her lay safety, comfort, and a life of quiet desperation. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, and the possibility of making a real difference in the lives of people she loved. For the first time since her wedding day, Queen Alara felt fully alive. The journey to Valthara normally took 5 days of comfortable travel, but pushing hard and taking the more direct mountain routes, they could make it in 3. As they climbed higher into the passes, the air grew thinner and colder. And Alara found herself remembering other times she had traveled these paths. Usually in her father's company, usually during peaceful times when the greatest danger had been mountain storms or loose stones on the trail. Now, as they crested a ridge on the 2nd day of travel, she could see smoke rising from the valley below. Not the gentle smoke of cooking fires and hearth warmth, but the black, acrid smoke of burning buildings. Her guide, a grizzled man named Thomas, who had served her father's army for 20 years, pulled his horse alongside hers. "That's Millbrook, Your Majesty," he said grimly. "Or what's left of it." Alara stared down at the ruins of the village where she had attended harvest festivals as a child, where she had learned to dance traditional folk dances and had listened to traveling minstrels tell stories of ancient heroes. Now it was nothing but blackened timbers and scattered stones. "Are there survivors?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Hard to tell from here. But it doesn't look like there's anyone moving down there," Thomas replied. "The raiders usually take captives if they're planning to demand ransom. But if they were just after supplies and terror." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. They pressed on, and with each mile, the evidence of the raiders' passage became more apparent. Burned farmhouses, trampled crops, scattered belongings left behind by families who had fled in panic. The few travelers they encountered were refugees heading away from the border, their faces hollow with shock and loss. But it was when they finally saw the walls of Valthara Castle rising ahead of them that Alara truly understood the scope of the crisis. The normally busy roads leading to the capital were crowded with people, not merchants and pilgrims and ordinary travelers, but streams of displaced families carrying whatever possessions they could manage. The castle itself showed signs of hasty fortification, with additional defenses being constructed and guard patrols more numerous and alert than she had ever seen them. As their small company approached the main gate, Alara pulled her hood back and revealed her face to the guards. The reaction was immediate. Shouts of recognition, running footsteps, and within minutes, her father himself was striding across the courtyard to meet her. King Aldrich looked older than she remembered, with new lines of worry etched around his eyes and gray threading through his beard. But when he saw her, his face lit up with such relief and joy that she felt like a little girl again, safe in her father's strong arms. "Alara," he breathed, embracing her tightly. "My brave daughter. I hoped you would come, but I feared the journey was too dangerous. I couldn't stay away when my people needed help," she replied, and realized that for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But even as she savored the reunion, she was aware of the organized chaos around them. Messengers arriving with reports, advisors conferring in urgent whispers, and the distant sound of hammers and saws as workers raced to strengthen the castle's defenses. The situation was clearly more desperate than even the urgent message had conveyed. "Father," she said quietly, "tell me everything." As they walked toward the castle's war room, King Aldrich began to outline the scope of the crisis. The northern raiders had coordinated their attacks more effectively than ever before, striking multiple targets simultaneously and retreating before any organized response could be mounted. Worse, they seemed to have detailed knowledge of the local defenses and patrol patterns, suggesting either extensive scouting or inside information. "We've managed to evacuate most of the border settlements," he explained. "But the cost in resources and morale has been devastating. The refugees need food and shelter, our remaining villages need protection, and our army needs reinforcement if we're going to mount any kind of effective counterattack. Refugees. Our refugees need food. Our refugees need food." Alara nodded, her mind already working through the logistics and possibilities. But as they entered the war room, where maps and reports covered every available surface, she stopped short. Standing beside the large table that held a detailed map of the region was a figure she had never expected to see again. Prince Adrian of Astoria stood studying troop movements and supply lines, his finger tracing possible routes on the map. He looked older, more weathered, with new scars on his hands that spoke of recent battles. But when he looked up and saw her, the years seemed to fall away. And for a moment, she was once again the young princess who had fallen in love in a garden full of roses. "Your Majesty," he said formally, bowing deeply. But his green eyes held warmth and something that might have been wonder as he straightened. "I had heard rumors that Queen Elara of Eastmere was riding to her homeland's aid. I hoped they might be true." Quote, "Architecturally, Prince Adrian," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the sudden hammering of her heart. "I should have known that Astoria would not abandon its neighbors in their time of need." Her father looked between them, clearly aware of the undercurrents in the conversation but focused on more immediate concerns. "Adrian's forces have been fighting the raiders for 2 weeks," he explained. "His knowledge of their tactics has been invaluable in planning our defense." As Adrian began to brief her on the current military situation, Elara found herself caught between past and present. Between the woman she had become and the girl she had been. 3 years ago, she had lost him to political necessity. Now, in the midst of crisis and danger, fate had brought them together again. But she was no longer the unmarried princess, with nothing but her heart to guide her. She was a queen, a mother, and a woman who had learned that sometimes love meant sacrifice, and sometimes sacrifice opened unexpected doors to different kinds of courage. The war for Valthara's survival was about to begin, and Elara would face it standing beside the man she had never stopped loving, fighting for the home they both cherished. But she would face it as the queen she had become, not the princess she had been, and that difference would make all the difference in what was to come. The war council that evening stretched late into the night, with maps spread across oak tables and candles burning down to stubs, as military leaders debated strategies and tactics. Elara sat between her father and Adrian, contributing insights about terrain and local resources while trying to ignore the way Adrian's presence affected her concentration. Every time he spoke, every time he gestured toward the maps, she was reminded of all the conversations they had shared about creating a better future for their kingdoms. Now that future was threatened by an enemy that seemed to know their every weakness. "The pattern suggests they have someone feeding them information," Adrian said, pointing to the scattered attack sites on the map. "Look. They hit the granary at Millbrook first, then the blacksmith shops in Thornfield, then the horse breeding farms near Riverstone. These aren't random raids. Someone told them exactly what targets would cause the most damage to our ability to defend ourselves." King Aldrich nodded grimly. "We've suspected as much, but we haven't been able to identify the source. It could be a captured soldier, a bribed merchant, or someone within our own ranks." Elara finished quietly. The thought made her stomach clench. But they couldn't afford to ignore any possibility. "We need to set a trap," Adrian said, his voice taking on the decisive tone she remembered from their old conversations about solving problems. "Feed different information to different groups of people, and see which version the raiders act on." Lord Commander William, who had arrived that afternoon with the advance forces from Eastmere, leaned forward with interest. "What did you have in mind, Your Highness?" As Adrian outlined his proposal for a coordinated deception, Elara found herself watching him with new eyes. The young man she had fallen in love with had matured into a seasoned military leader. Someone who could think strategically under pressure while never losing sight of his compassion for the people they were trying to protect. When he spoke about minimizing civilian casualties and protecting refugee camps, she heard the same idealism that had first attracted her to him, but tempered now with hard-won experience. The plan they eventually agreed upon was complex and dangerous. They would spread false information about a planned evacuation of the royal treasury, making it seem as though the most valuable artifacts and gold reserves would be moved to a supposedly secret location. Different versions of the story would be told to different groups within the castle, each version containing subtle variations that would help them identify which group had been compromised. Meanwhile, the real strategy would be to reinforce the most vulnerable refugee camps and prepare defensive positions that could protect the greatest number of people. It was a plan that prioritized human lives over treasure, exactly the kind of approach that Alara had always believed in. The risk, her father said soberly, is that if the raiders do attack the false treasury location, they'll be furious when they discover the deception. Their retaliation could be brutal. The greater risk is doing nothing while our people continue to die, Ilara replied firmly. We have to take action, even if it's dangerous. Adrian's eyes met hers across the table, and she saw approval and admiration in his gaze. Queen Ilara is right, he said. Sometimes the most dangerous choice is the right one. The meeting broke up near midnight, with various commanders and advisors dispersing to carry out their assigned tasks. Ilara remained behind to study the detailed maps of the border region, memorizing the locations of villages, valleys, and mountain passes that would be crucial in the days ahead. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice she was no longer alone until Adrian spoke softly behind her. You've become everything I knew you could be, he said quietly. She turned to find him standing a respectful distance away, his expression serious but warm. The candlelight played across his features, highlighting the small scar above his left eyebrow that was new since she had last seen him up close. I've become what I had to become, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. And do you regret it? He asked, stepping closer but still maintaining proper distance. The path you chose? Ilara considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, she might have answered immediately, pouring out her heart about loneliness and lost dreams. But she had learned to think before she spoke, to weigh her words as carefully as she weighed her actions. I regret the pain, she said finally. I regret that choosing duty meant hurting someone I cared about. But I can't regret my son, or the good I've been able to do as Queen of Eastmere, or even the strength I've discovered in myself through facing difficult choices. Adrian nodded slowly. Gabriel, that's his name, isn't it? Your son? The fact that he knew surprised her, though it shouldn't have. Royal children were matters of public record, and Adrian would have heard about the heir to Eastmere's throne through normal diplomatic channels. Yes, she said, and couldn't help but smile at the thought of her little boy. He's 2 years old, with the most inquisitive mind you could imagine. He wants to know how everything works. Clocks, and water wheels, and why birds can fly, but people can't. He sounds wonderful, Adrian said, and the genuine warmth in his voice made her heart ache. You must miss him terribly. Well, I do, she admitted, but he's safe in Eastmere, and I'm here because this is where I'm needed. Someday, when he's old enough to understand, I hope he'll be proud that his mother fought for what was right, instead of hiding behind castle walls. He will be, Adrian said with quiet certainty. How could he not be proud of a mother who would risk everything to protect her people? They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, studying the map spread between them. Ilara found herself remembering all the times they had stood like this during their courtship, poring over books and documents, talking about their dreams for the future. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were finally working together toward a common goal, but only because war had forced the collaboration that politics had made impossible. Adrian, she said softly, I want you to know what happened 3 years ago. The choice I made. It wasn't because I stopped caring about you. He looked up from the map, his green eyes serious. Your father was right. Valthara needed immediate allies, not uncertain possibilities. I was asking you to choose love over duty, and that wasn't fair. You were asking me to choose a future over the present, she corrected. And maybe, in a perfect world, that would have been the right choice. But the world isn't perfect, and queens don't get to make decisions based on their hearts alone. No, he agreed. They don't. But Ilara, he paused, seeming to wrestle with whether to say something more. Finally, he continued, I want you to know that losing you taught me to be a better leader. When I went home after your father's rejection, I was angry and heartbroken. But gradually, I realized that you had shown me what real leadership looked like. Putting the welfare of your people above your personal desires. I tried to become the kind of ruler who would deserve someone like you, even if I couldn't have you. The words hit her like arrows, each one finding its mark in her carefully guarded heart. She had to look away from his face, focusing on the map, to regain her composure. "And did you," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "become that kind of ruler? You'll have to judge for yourself," he said. But there was a hint of his old humor in his tone. "Though I should mention that I've managed to avoid getting married for 3 years, despite my advisor's increasingly creative attempts at matchmaking. Despite everything, the war, the danger, the impossible situation they found themselves in." Elara laughed. It was a real laugh, spontaneous and genuine, the kind she hadn't experienced since Gabriel's birth. "Your poor advisors," she said, still smiling. "I imagine they've paraded every eligible princess from here to the Eastern Sea past you. They have indeed. But it turns out that once you've known someone who can discuss military strategy and poetry with equal passion, who cares more about her people's welfare than her own comfort, and who can make you laugh even when the world seems to be falling apart," he shrugged eloquently. "Other options tend to pale in comparison." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken longing and impossible wishes. Elara felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack, emotions she had buried for 3 years threatening to surface. "Adrian," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps in the corridor outside. A young messenger burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty! Your Highness!" The lookouts report movement in the northern pass, a large force of raiders heading toward Riverside Village. They'll reach the outer farms within hours. And the moment of intimacy shattered as both Elara and Adrian immediately focused on the crisis at hand. The trap they had set was working sooner than expected. Someone had clearly passed along the false information about the treasury route, and the raiders were taking the bait. "How many?" Adrian asked, already reaching for his sword belt. "The scouts estimate at least 200, possibly more," the messenger replied. "Lord Commander William is preparing the cavalry for a rescue mission." Elara's mind raced through the implications. Riverside Village was directly on the false treasury route they had publicized. If the plan worked, the raiders would find an empty target and soldiers waiting for them. But if something went wrong, if their intelligence was faulty or their trap failed, innocent civilians would pay the price. "I'm riding with the rescue force," she said, reaching for her own weapons. "Elara, no," Adrian said immediately. "You're needed here to coordinate with the other commanders." "I'm needed where the fighting is," she replied firmly. "I know that village, I know the terrain, and I know how to fight. My people need to see that their queen isn't afraid to stand beside them in battle." It was Adrian's turn to study her face, and she could see him recognizing the same determination that had driven all her major decisions. This wasn't the impulsive choice of a love-struck girl. This was the calculated decision of a ruler who understood both the tactical and symbolic importance of her presence on the battlefield. "Then we ride together," he said finally. "But you stay close to me, and if I tell you to retreat, you don't argue." "I'll stay close," she agreed. "But I won't retreat if there are people who need protecting." As they rushed to prepare for battle, Elara felt a strange sense of completion settling over her. For 3 years, she had wondered what might have happened if circumstances had been different, if they had been able to fight side by side for the causes they both believed in. Now, in the midst of the greatest crisis her homeland had ever faced, they would finally have that chance. The ride to Riverside Village took place under a sky full of stars, with the thunder of hoofbeats and the jingle of armor creating a rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of Elara's heart. She rode between Adrian and Lord Commander William, part of a force of nearly 100 soldiers representing the combined armies of 3 kingdoms. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. When they crested the hill overlooking Riverside Village, they could see the glow of torches in the distance. The raiders had indeed taken the bait and were searching the supposed treasury location. But they could also see something else that made Ilara's blood run cold. Flames beginning to rise from the village itself. "They're burning the houses to draw us out," Adrian said grimly. "They know we'll have to choose between pursuing them and saving the civilians." "Then we don't choose," Ilara replied, her voice hard with determination. "William, take half the force and engage the main raider group. Adrian and I will lead the rest into the village to evacuate the civilians and put out the fires." It was a dangerous plan that divided their already outnumbered force. But it was the only way to protect innocent lives, while still maintaining their trap. As they charged down the hillside toward the burning village, Ilara felt time slow down around her. She was aware of Adrian riding beside her, his sword already drawn and his face set with grim concentration. She was aware of the soldiers following behind them, trusting her leadership even though she had never led them into battle before. And she was aware of her own heart, beating steady and strong, no longer conflicted about where she belonged or what she was meant to do. The battle that followed would be remembered in songs and stories for generations to come. Queen Ilara of Eastmere and Prince Adrian of Astoria fought side by side through burning streets, rescuing trapped villagers and driving back raider forces with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. She saved his life when a raider's axe came too close to his head. He returned the favor when her horse stumbled, and she found herself surrounded by enemies. But it was in the final moments of the battle that the most crucial moment occurred. As the last of the raiders fled toward the mountains, defeated and demoralized by their unexpected resistance, Ilara and Adrian found themselves standing together in the village square, both breathing hard and covered in soot and blood, but victorious. "We did it," she said, looking around at the saved village and the rescued people who were beginning to emerge from hiding. "We did," Adrian agreed, but he was looking at her, not at their victory. "Ilara, I need to tell you something. In case we don't get another chance like this." She turned to face him fully, suddenly aware that they were alone in the square, that the other soldiers were busy with their own tasks, and that this might indeed be their only opportunity for complete honesty. "These 3 years," he continued, "I've thought about you every day, not just as the woman I lost, but as the example of what a true leader should be. Every decision I've made, every choice about how to treat my people, or handle conflicts or plan for the future, I've asked myself, what Queen Ilara would do. You've made me a better man and a better ruler, even from a distance." Ilara felt tears mixing with the soot on her cheeks, but her voice was steady when she replied. "And you've been my conscience," she said. "Every time I've been tempted to give up, to accept that my marriage is just a political arrangement and my life is just a series of duties, I've remembered the man who saw me as more than just a princess, who believed I could be a queen worth following." They stood facing each other in the flickering light of dying flames, two rulers who had found their way back to each other through war and sacrifice and the kind of love that transcends personal desire. Around them, the village was coming back to life as people began the work of rebuilding and recovery. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the returning cavalry, victorious in their own battle against the main raider force. "What happens now?" Adrian asked quietly. Ilara considered the question, weighing all the factors that would determine their future. She was still married to Marcus, still bound by the political alliances that had shaped her choices 3 years ago. But she was also a proven leader who had just helped save her homeland, a queen whose actions had earned her the right to make her own decisions about the future. "Now," she said, "we finish this war. We drive the raiders back beyond the mountains and make sure our people are safe. We strengthen the alliances between our kingdoms, not through marriage or political manipulation, but through genuine partnership and shared values. And then," he pressed gently, "and then we see what the future brings," she replied. "I can't make promises about things beyond my control, but I can promise that whatever happens, I'll face it as the woman you helped me become. Someone who chooses courage over comfort, duty over desire, and honor over easy answers." Adrian nodded, understanding all the things she couldn't say directly. They both knew that her marriage to Marcus would have to be addressed. that the political realities of their situation would require careful navigation, and that their personal happiness would always be secondary to their responsibilities as rulers. But they also knew that love like theirs, love that makes both people stronger and better, couldn't be destroyed by time, or distance, or circumstance. As the other soldiers began to gather around them, preparing for the ride back to the castle, Adrian took her hand briefly in his. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "However long it takes, whatever challenges we face, I'll wait for you to find your way to whatever future we're meant to share." The ride back to Valthera Castle was triumphant, with rescued villagers and victorious soldiers creating a procession that grew larger with each mile, as word of their victory spread. But for Elara, the real triumph was the quiet certainty she felt about her own identity and purpose. She was no longer the confused princess, torn between love and duty. She was a queen who had learned that the highest form of love was helping someone become their best self, and that true partnership meant facing the world's challenges together with wisdom and courage. The war with the northern raiders would continue for several more months, but the victory at Riverside Village marked the turning point. The successful trap revealed the traitor within their ranks, a corrupt quartermaster who had been selling information for gold, and allowed the allied kingdoms to coordinate their defenses more effectively. By winter's end, the raider threat had been eliminated, and the border regions were safe again. Throughout the campaign, Elara and Adrian worked together with the easy partnership of two people who understood each other completely. Their relationship remained carefully proper in public, but their mutual respect and affection was obvious to everyone around them. They developed strategies together, led missions side by side, and gradually built the kind of trust and collaboration between their kingdoms that neither political marriage nor diplomatic treaty could have achieved. When news finally came that King Marcus of Eastmere had been killed in a hunting accident, thrown from his horse while chasing a stag through treacherous terrain, Elara felt sadness for the waste of a life that could have been better lived, but not grief for the man who had been her husband in name only. After the appropriate period of mourning, she quietly began the process of dissolving the political arrangements that had bound her to a loveless marriage. A year after the Battle of Riverside Village, Queen Elara of Eastmere and Prince Adrian of Astoria announced their engagement in a ceremony that took place not in a throne room, but in the rebuilt village square where they had fought together for the future they both believed in. The alliance between their kingdoms was formalized not through conquest or political manipulation, but through a partnership founded on shared values, mutual respect, and love that had proven itself worthy of the greatest challenges. Their wedding was simple by royal standards but rich in meaning, attended by the people whose lives they had helped save and the soldiers who had followed them into battle. When they exchanged vows, they promised not just to love and honor each other, but to rule together with wisdom, courage, and compassion, to be the kind of leaders their people deserved and their kingdoms needed. Prince Gabriel, now 5 years old and fascinated by everything around him, served as ring-bearer and promptly announced to the assembled crowd that he was excited to have a father who knew how to fight dragons. Adrian's response, that he was honored to be part of a family brave enough to face any dragon that needed fighting, became part of the family legend that would be passed down for generations. Years later, when historians wrote about the Great Raider War and the alliance of the three kingdoms that followed, they would focus on the military strategies, the political implications, and the economic benefits of the peace that ensued. But those who lived through those times, the people who were saved, and the soldiers who served, remembered something different. They remembered Queen Elara and King Adrian riding side by side into battle, fighting not for personal glory, but for the protection of innocent people. They remembered rulers who led from the front rather than sending others to face dangers they wouldn't face themselves. And they remembered a love story that proved that sometimes, when two people are meant to be together, time and distance, and even political necessity, can't keep them apart forever. In the end, their quiet farewell in that war room had not been an ending at all, but a beginning. The first chapter in a love story that would span decades and inspire generations. It was the kind of memory that time cannot fade, because it was built on something stronger than passion or politics. It was built on the recognition that true love makes both people better, and that the best partnerships are forged not in easy times, but in the crucible of shared challenges and mutual sacrifice. The little princess who had once practiced archery in her father's garden had become a queen whose aim was true in all things that mattered. And the prince who had once been rejected for political necessity had proven himself worthy of a love that was strong enough to wait, patient enough to endure, and deep enough to transform two kingdoms and all the lives they touched. Their story became the kind of tale that mothers told their daughters and fathers told their sons. Not just about love conquering all, but about love that makes people brave enough to conquer themselves, wise enough to choose duty over desire, and strong enough to build something lasting in a world that often values temporary solutions over permanent principles. In the royal gardens where they had first met, now expanded to include plants and flowers from both their kingdoms, they would walk together in the evenings, planning for the future and remembering the past. Sometimes their children would join them. Gabriel and his younger siblings learning about leadership and love from parents who had earned their happiness through service to something greater than themselves. And sometimes, when the moonlight was bright and the roses were blooming, they would remember two young people who had fallen in love with each other's dreams, lost each other to the demands of duty, and found each other again through the kind of courage that changes the world. It was a memory that time could not fade, because it had been transformed into something more precious than memory. It had become a legacy of love that would endure as long as people remembered that the greatest stories are not about perfect happiness, but about imperfect people who choose to love well despite the cost.